Hi, and thanks for tuning in to What's Next Living Longer, Better, Smarter. In this episode, Caring and Companionship in a New Era. This edition is made possible by Intuition Robotics, empowering older adults to live happier, healthier, and more independent lives at home. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with Mary Furlong. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Fred. Hope you're having a safe and healthy and happy holiday season.
Well, congratulations, I want to say right at the outset, Mary, on a very worthwhile and successful Longevity Innovation Summit, which just concluded a few days ago, normally in Washington, D.C., but virtual once again. What a wealth of information and great panels on all of the great work that's taking place. And our guests today were part of the summit. MSNBC and NBC News anchor Richard Lui, author of a book titled Enough About Me, The Unexpected Power of Selflessness. He also created a wonderful documentary titled Sky Blossom. But first, we want to welcome the CEO and co-founder of Intuition Robotics, Dor Skuler. Thank you for taking the time, Dor.
Thanks for having me on.
Wonderful to see you, Dor. I've really watched the company and been a part of it from the beginning. And you're doing some very innovative work. You certainly know a lot about user interface design and the customer and the empathy that happens with a digital companion. So tell us more about your journey.
Sure. So for those that don't know us yet, we create this product called ElliQ. And ElliQ is a proactive companion, a sidekick of sorts, that lives with older adults, primarily ones that live alone, and helps them live more independent lives at home, be healthier and happier. So think of ElliQ just entering someone's home and then really easy to install, seamless to set up, and start engaging them proactively and ask them how they're doing, how they're sleeping, nudge them through wellness, help them strengthen their connections with their family, help them stay independent at home with things like mobility services and food delivery and groceries, gives them a lot of information like news and fun facts and jokes and sports and weather, etc., but mainly engages them and acknowledges them and remembers what they said before and has meaningful conversations with them, all fully autonomous by our AI.
So tell us how it ties into a person's medical care and also with professionals and caregivers.
Yeah, so we started ElliQ really kind of at the core of trying to be an intervention of sorts for the sense of loneliness and social isolation, and then starting adding more and more pockets of value to help with independence. And what we found is people are engaging really, really highly with ElliQ. They're using her about 17 times a day. They interact with her, and they share really meaningful information like how they're feeling or how they slept, or that things are not going as well. And we found ourselves sitting with this information, and in our quest to be helpful and help people live healthier lives, we were focused on preventive and wellness aspects, but what happens when there's a change in clinical condition? So what we did is we started working with primary care and with Medicare Advantage insurers and see if, of course, with the explicit permission of the patient or the user in this case that becomes a patient in the context of this use case, we can actually share the change in clinical condition directly with their physician. And then actually the physician started telling us, well, for this person who has a specific chronic illness, or maybe just got discharged from a hospital, or maybe got prescribed a new medication, I'd like ElliQ to ask them for the next X amount of time, very specific questions to help me track how they're doing. Like, did you pick up the new meds? Are you having side effects? Or let's measure your blood pressure every day for the next 2 weeks because you might be hypertensive or what have you. So that's kind of the way it started. Then the other thing we found is, there are lots of studies that show that the stronger the relationship between the older adult patient and their physician, the stronger the quality of care. And also the less expensive the care is because people are more likely to update their physician on how they're doing as opposed to wait and go to the emergency room when things are going bad. So we use the communication capabilities of ElliQ to allow the clinics to communicate directly with their patients. We're seeing, by the way, 100% read rate on these messages by their patients. So it's proving to be a very, very effective way to communicate between patients and their physicians. This is all in the starting days where ElliQ is kind of a more direct-to-consumer offering, and through senior living, has seen a lot more scale. Healthcare moves at the speed of healthcare, but early results are promising. We've seen multiple cases already where, frankly, we save people's lives through the conversations ElliQ has with their owner and then updating their physician on changes in their clinical condition.
Eleanor, welcome back. You have a message from John. Would you like to see it?
Sure.
John said, "Hi Mom. Guess where we are today? There's also an image. It looks like they're having a good time in Venice. Would you like to reply?"
Absolutely.
I'll record your message after the beep.
I love Venice. You simply must go and see St. Mark's Basilica. It is just gorgeous, and that is where your dad proposed to me.
So Dor, I've had a chance to take a look at ElliQ firsthand. And I know it's early, but wow is my reaction really. It checks in with you throughout the day, reminds you to get inside, get some exercise, how get outside, I should say, and get some exercise, and asks you how you're feeling, tells jokes, does some dancing now and then. I know you're just getting started, but describe for us more about the user experience here and the setup.
Sure. So the initial setup is we ship a unit to an individual that qualifies, and they either set it up by themselves, which by the way is remarkable. You know, many of us think that somebody in their 80s or 90s might have a hard time setting technology up. It's actually very, very simple. And if not, we have a team of very empathetic and fun customer service people that will walk the older adults through the setup. So that's kind of how it begins. And from that point on, basically plugging her into electricity and giving her a Wi-Fi network. From that point on, ElliQ starts teaching the user how to use her, and she proactively approaches them. The real core, the heart of everything is projecting empathy and acknowledging the user, noticing when they wake up, noticing when they leave, when they come back, asking them how their day was. If they didn't sleep well, recommending tips around their bedtime to sleep better, whether it's breathing exercises or mindfulness or soothing music or tips around not using screens before bedtime, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the core. And then we start moving towards doing things together. So rather than having ElliQ give you a game or play music for you, we find that the older adults using ElliQ will listen to music together with her or play a game with her. We just finished Hanukkah now. They'll light Hanukkah candles together with ElliQ. You will light your own candles in the physical space. ElliQ will light her virtual candles and sing you or together with you the Hanukkah songs, right? So this notion of first acknowledging the user, approaching them proactively, remembering previous conversations, and then doing things together builds the foundation on top of which we can then enter behavior change. And as you mentioned, Fred, we'll nudge our customers to eat better, to hydrate, to do cognitive games, to do stress reduction, to exercise. We just partnered with Silver Sneakers and offer their library of content that's tailored for older adults as far as exercise. To learn new things. It's really important to learn new things and to laugh. There's this quirky sense of humor ElliQ has as a character, and if you see users with ElliQ or you hear their feedback, they'll often mention that she's just funny. So this sense of I'm learning new skills, I'm learning new stuff, I'm laughing, someone's taking an interest in me, somebody's remembering me, acknowledging me, and also pushing me in areas that I want to better myself in, I think is kind of what it's all about. But I can't tell you what she'll do in any day because ElliQ makes her own decisions. It's a cognitive AI platform, and she'll decide if she's going to ask you how you slept or how you're feeling or what your mood is, and she'll, decide when to approach you and how to approach you and if to tell you a joke or not. And that's for the 60% of interactions or so that are initiated by the AI, which is ElliQ. The other 40% or so are the users just talking to her. And it's really interesting to see, they'll tell things that you won't expect people to share with a machine. Like they'll go to her and ask her how her night was, or how she's doing, or what she's going to be doing today. And it's very natural. It's not forced. It's very clear. If you look at ElliQ, she doesn't look like a human. She doesn't pretend to be human. Her name doesn't sound human. She kind of looks like a lamp. You can see a picture of her here behind me. And yet there's something about her body language and the persona, that's her character, that causes people to build what I can only describe as a relationship with her.
Do you think Alexa and Siri, I can't say those things too loud, do you think those things and Google have opened the door for you in some ways to people accepting these kinds of devices, being open to them in their homes?
For sure, although they come at this from a different waypoint. I think Alexa, Siri, Google have trained us and made it acceptable for us to talk to machines. Before them, it would have been very strange. If you heard somebody talking to a machine, before these products came out, you probably thought that they need to be hospitalized or something. So they made it socially acceptable. And for those people, and we have customers that have these products at home, it taught them how to interact with a voice-first platform. However, I think these products, while wonderful, and I have 6 Alexas at home, so I can test to be a happy user, are mainly utilitarian products that are developed for the general population. Alexa sets a timer for me. She tells me the weather. She plays music. It's always me giving her a command, and she's very efficient in giving me the exact same experience every time. I don't have a relationship with her, right? I don't feel the need to tell her that I'm going out for a couple of hours and then expect her to check in with me when I come back. With ElliQ, it's very, very different. It also creates, quite frankly, very interesting computer science questions. For example, ElliQ is the only proactive product out there, and she might ask you, hey, Mary, do you have a minute? I want to talk to you about something. And for a computer, you would respond, no, right? Assuming it was proactive. Other products aren't proactive yet, but you would respond no. To ElliQ, a common response might be, not right now. I need to go out right now and check the mailbox, but I'll be back in a few minutes, and that would be a great time. So just like for the machine to unpack that and understand that it's no, but it should reschedule a proactive approach for the next time it sees the user or something of that nature presents really, really interesting computer science problems for us.
And then she'll come back and say, is this a good time?
Correct. Right. And she asks herself all the time, right? She's goal-based. So she's trying to help achieve the goals. The goals are what the user is trying to achieve, right? Better health, mindfulness, learning new things, better connection with your family through messaging and picture sharing, what have you. But she doesn't want to be annoying either, because if she'll be proactive at the wrong time, people won't use the product. So we have to estimate all the time if the AI believes that you're emotionally available for an internet, right? I mean, like, even just think of the language. Are you available for ElliQ to approach you right now? Which does not, is not a straightforward question, because it's not only are you in front of her, is will she annoy you if she approaches you right now? And those are relatively interesting machine learning type questions that we solve here in Intuition Robotics.
So, Dor, I followed this story for a long time, the Intuition Robotics story, and you have an amazing set of investors. Tell us about the business model. How do you get an ElliQ? And also, did you evolve into this empathy? Did the user lead you into empathy and the conversation? Because I don't know of other people that have created something where people proactively want to have that conversation.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first one, why empathy? And that came from a realization around caring for my grandfather. And we got to the point after my grandma passed away that he needed a skilled nurse at home. And, we chose one with the right utilitarian skills. She can help him with his ADLs, getting dressed, going for a walk, eating well, what have you. And she was a skilled nurse. She checked all the boxes. It was a disaster, Mary. It did not work at all. And that's because they didn't get along well. There was no empathy there. And then we replaced her with someone else with the same exact skills. It was unbelievably successful, to the point where we stayed in touch with that individual long after he passed. And you ask yourself, well, what is the X factor here? And I believe that the X factor was empathy, was the fact that they shared interests. They both like classical music. She understood and appreciated his quirky sense of humor. and she was empathetic towards him. And then to me, the takeaway was the success or failure is not the ability to provide utility. It's the ability to connect and to project empathy and to make the person feel like you're acknowledging them and are along for the journey and growing as a character that's living with them. So that's, yeah, we were not as verbal about it. It was definitely a hypothesis when we started the company. We didn't even know how to articulate it fully. But once we started getting feedback from customers saying, I feel ElliQ is trying to help me. I feel ElliQ is acknowledging me. I feel ElliQ is here, somebody just said this to me last week, is gives me the benefit of a roommate without all the hassle. All right. So we started researching what they're actually telling us, and we understood that what they're telling us is they feel ElliQ is projecting empathy towards them.
And the
Your other questions around the business model, frankly, we don't know. I mean, you asked me two things there. How can you get an ElliQ, and what's the business model? So getting an ElliQ is very, very simple. Just go to ElliQ.com. And you can either nominate yourself or a loved one. We have a few inclusion criteria. They need to be over 65. They need to live alone. They need to have internet. And they need to be cognitively functioning. Okay. With that, they're eligible to get a free ElliQ. And we're seeing, quite frankly, a lot of people sign up over the last few weeks since we opened that project and are moving from dozens of users to hundreds of users. And we're using this time to understand if this technology works in bigger scale as well, and to really fine-tune the value that we're creating, not just for the older adult, but also for the wider ecosystem. Once we figure that out, I hope shortly, then we'll be able to articulate our monetization strategy. But we really need to make sure that our algorithms work in scale, that our engagement is staying super high, and that we can measure the value that we're generating in order to better explain the monetization to the public. So for now, you can get a free one if you qualify to those very, very simple criteria. And I can share with you that the engagement so far, we're seeing people interact with ElliQ about 17 times a day. We're seeing them share what we would call valuable information to help us serve them better about 2 times a day. And when ElliQ suggests to them an activity around health and wellness, when they show us they're available for that, we're seeing a 68% response rate, meaning that not a yes or no, I mean acceptance of the older adult agreeing to do the suggestion that we're suggesting to them. In other categories around entertainment or connectivity or so on, it's still in the 60s. So very, very, very high success rate. So we just want to keep that up at a larger sample size, and then we can share around business model.
It's so impressive, and those numbers are really impressive. And of course, we see a very large rising number of solo agers in the U.S. and around the world.
So with the technology, Dor, where do you want to take this? Obviously, it's doing a lot now, and I'm certain you're adding new capabilities all the time that she's going to interact with people about. So where does it go from here? What's your vision for this?
Yeah, really our vision is to try to understand holistically where we can help people that age alone in their home or in independent living. And wherever we identify an area where we can help with, we want to add more capabilities around that and be able to sustain it over time. So for example, we haven't done enough, in my view, on strengthening the relationship between the older adult and their family and other loved ones. So now we're giving that a big effort. What can we do to create moments of sharing? What can we do to increase the amount of interactions between the family and their grandma, grandpa, mom or dad, or sister, brother? So that's
video conferencing kinds of things, or what do you?
Sure, but picture sharing. So I send you a picture of my daughter's birthday, and it will show up immediately on ElliQ's screen, and ElliQ will be able to tell you what that was, for example, or maybe messaging, back and forth messaging, which we already have in the product, or maybe nudges that you can, this might be a good time to send a message to someone, or birthday greetings, or birthday cards, or holiday greetings. Basically you break that down and say, okay, where do people usually interact, and how can we help kind of lubricate, if you will, and nudge both parties a little bit to interact more and create more human to human relationship via ElliQ. as a social entity, if you will. So that's one area that I think is going to go well. I'm really, really excited about providing assistance for basic needs. So we started with things like rides, grocery shopping. We're now looking at food delivery and handyman services. So if the winter's coming and your HVAC isn't working well, maybe we can help the older adult find somebody to fix that so they can stay at home safely. Or if there's a leak at home, how can we help rectify that as soon as possible? Obviously, more content. The more content we introduce, the more we see people want even more content. So some exciting partnerships will be announced there soon. And healthcare. I think the change in US policy around capitated plans create a very, very interesting alignment of interest, where it's in the best interest of the patient and their medical insurer / capitated risk provider to help them with prevention and to intervene as soon as possible when there's deterioration, as opposed to wait for somebody to get sick and then have them just swipe a card, right? And to that, the fact that ElliQ has multiple conversations every single day and people share with her how they're doing, and physicians are in a place where they are interested in receiving that information, I think can actually change the way we're doing care today to a much more proactive and much more customizable and personalized approach. So there's a lot of work to do, Fred. Not enough people to do it, but we're working on that too.
Well, there's more info at ElliQ.com, ELLIQ.com.
So, Dor, congratulations to you and your team on what you've created, what you've evolved, and where you're going. I know it will be of real interest to our audience and fun to watch your story as it evolves.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Fred. It's really a pleasure to be on your show.
Mary, the innovation at Intuition Robotics is exciting. I was using ElliQ the other day, and she asked me if I'd been outside. I said I was out raking leaves, and she said, "Well, maybe someday she'll have legs and can help." So that I can really look forward to. ElliQ and devices like it can become an important part, really, of caregiving too. And that leads us to our next guest. Richard Lui is a journalist and news anchor for MSNBC and NBC News, and the author of a book titled Enough About Me, The Unexpected Power of Selflessness. Richard, we appreciate you being with us.
Fred, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. And Mary as well. Good to see both of you.
We're so glad to have you here. There's so many, many people in this audience who are building businesses serving caregivers, and so many people who find themselves becoming caregivers. Sometimes it's gradual, and sometimes, like it happened to me, and one day your life really changes. So you're sharing with the world your story of what you and your family have worked through, and you've touched on so many topics that are relevant to this audience. So tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, Mary, if it wasn't for taking care of my father in California and me living in New York and making that trip 2 or 3 times a month for now 7 years, I don't think that book would have ever been written. And it's way above my pay grade to write a book about selflessness. I'm no expert on it, if you will. I'm more a journalist digging into a topic I think that in my reporting I've seen really bob its ugly head, and that is that being mean, being violent, being hateful is way too easy right now. And at the time we're talking, it's not too far away from what happened in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and it's not too far away from Newtown, Connecticut. That's years ago. Waukesha is weeks ago or days, and you just look at those as bookends and you go, gosh, there's a lot of things that just aren't working well. We're being very selfish as a culture and as a society. And the thing that inspired me to even consider something like that as a journalist, again, this is not about I'm the perfect selfless person, because I am not, as many will attest to. It is more that we need to do something in the opposite. And what inspired me is and you know this is the focus of the Innovation Summit, the Longevity Innovation Summit, and that whole collective and that whole ecosystem of caring for other people. And it's a loved one that you are trying to see how you can get better solutions to them, better services to them, better ideas. And the caregiving is what when I was sitting down with the agent Mary, just going, you know what, caregiving is a topic, but why don't we talk about something that drives caregiving? And that began the anti-self self-help book.
Tell us a little bit more, Richard, about what people are going to find in here. You've got so many, I want to say lessons, and they are lessons for us all.
Yeah, Fred, because I'm a business junkie. I love business books. I've always, all the way through business school and after, and you brought up Citibank a second ago, and the startups that I've been involved in the Bay Area as well as in Asia. And I was thinking to myself, well, I've got to make sure to prove it to myself in every chapter, in every page. And so, I brought onto the team a scientist, as well as a researcher, and 2 comics. And, it's my weak attempt at humor in the book, but why not? As both of you know really well, we're talking about longevity, innovation in a summit, and we laugh a lot, right? Every time we gather, get a good laugh. And sometimes there's a cry too involved in it, right? And the way I attacked the book of selflessness was not to look at it completely austerely. So yes, there's comics involved. I brought in a cartoonist as well. There's 2 poets that helped with the book. There's some poems at the end that are related to my caregiving journey. There's a playbook at the end, which is basically a summary of all of the lessons that the researchers and myself had found over the time that we were working on the book. And so we hope that you find something that is practical and usable day to day. Because again, I approached it like I know all 3 of us enjoy reading, are these sort of very constructive, productive business books that are human at the same time.
Well, you went to your employer here and at some point decided, I'm going to cut back or change my work schedule to be able to care for my father. A tough decision that a lot of people maybe could not make. So tell us about that and the reaction from your employer, which obviously here is phenomenal.
Yeah, Yvette Miley was my boss at the time, a seasoned leader in journalism and news. And I say that because I would expect nothing less of somebody that I'm working with at 30 Rock. But what surprised me, not that I didn't think she had it within her, was that when I walked in the office and I thought, this is an 8-day-a-week job, and I'm going to be asking to be able to somehow take care of my dad in California, because there's no way I wasn't going to do it. And if it meant walking away from a hard-fought-for career, that's the way it was going to be, because I know my dad would have done the same. And she sits there and quiet and just, and she says, well, Richard, when I was finished, that sweaty period when you're saying to your supervisor your thing and you're just sweating inside and outside. And she just like this, and she says, Richard, I'm a long distance caregiver too. Number one, we don't talk personal stuff, but that's the first thing she said. And my mother lives in Florida, and I am the primary caregiver for her. I know I'm sitting many miles away from her, but I am her primary caregiver. It's strange that you and I, she said to me in reflection, that given our busy careers, that we are the people at that time that really wanted to step forward in our lives for our parents. Her mother passed away earlier this year, and I just knew the hurt that she went through. She'd been working long distance and, excellent professional news. And I knew that when she shared that little bit of herself, that therefore it meant a lot. And so as soon as that happened, I reached out to her and was like, Yvette, I know you're getting a lot of people emailing you, but you shared with me something that I know you don't share with a lot of people. And she ended up spending the majority of this year in Florida in her mom's home. And that was one of the silver linings of this difficult time, is she was able to do that. But I think when we can bring in that part of our humanity, which we've been learning recently to do in business, that we are better business people, we are more innovative, we are more collaborative. And she showed that to me 7 years ago. It's the beginning of chipping away at that $500 billion annually that we lose in caregiver value across our country. It's a way of chipping away at the 12, 13 billion that businesses lose. It's a way of chipping away at the difficulty of retention and absenteeism and presenteeism in business. And she did that. So I know she doesn't like it. I bring up her name all the time, but you got to give, as both of you know, credit where credit is due, especially when it comes to this. I told her when I gave her the book, I said, so, because you let me take care of my dad, it ended up that I wrote a book about selflessness, and I wrote in the book to her, I said, thank you for changing my life, because that's what it really was, Fred and Mary. Because when she said, you can now work part-time and fly home to take care of your dad, that did change my career trajectory tremendously. I'm writing a book about selflessness, and as both of you know, you've been so gracious over the years, the movie on caregiving, Sky Blossom. These things I would never have thought of if she didn't open that door.
Because you can't do that kind of work without the time. I'm old enough to remember when work-life benefits were just introduced in the workplace. And at the time, you would hide the fact that you had a career and you also took care of your children. When it came to elder care, people would hide, and caregiving, people would hide that even more, because a child eventually grows up and goes to school. If you're diagnosed with a long-term disease, that tension stays with you for 2 decades. And often, I think the caregiver herself or himself, it wreaks havoc with their own health. It's like the caregiver 40 pounds that you gain because you're not working out. Although I noticed in your book, you have a studio in your apartment and a gym. So you pay attention to your own health, right?
I did for a while, but you bring up a really good point. When we think about mental health and caregiving, I don't know if we address it well enough. And it's something I've been asking myself, am I okay? Although part of my therapy, which I've said publicly, is talking about it as openly and as honestly as I can when folks ask me. I think the difficulty is when we don't hear ourselves say how tough it might be or what we're going through. And I don't believe we've fully unwrapped what the physical and mental health costs are, and embraced it and talked about it openly. But I do know that the last 2 years have opened up the ability for us to understand the many shades of this gray. Because before, when we talked about mental health and anything, mental health was always the boogeyman. It was always walking down the street screaming at the sky. And we know that mental health is a lot of stuff in between. It is not having a good day, right? It is second guessing your abilities. It is getting angry when you shouldn't get angry. And I am one of the things I'm grateful for in the last 2 years is that openness now that we have about discussing mental health plus X. And in this case, we're talking about caregiving.
I'm glad that you addressed the employee benefit issue, because you were fortunate that you had someone who related to the situation. Other people may be afraid to do that.
Yes.
So great business policy in 2022 and beyond to have HR benefits that pay attention to this fast growing a number of caregivers.
Yeah. And it takes, I think, Mary, and I'm glad you're drilling down that, because it takes a cultural shift. And, if we were to be talking 3 years ago if we were to bring this up, I don't know if there would have been an opening as large as there is now, right? I think businesses had to really look at being a collaborative and caring structure. COVID just required it. There was no way around it. And they really had to think about the people in their organizations, where that wasn't necessarily the case before. I should say that wasn't necessarily an understanding that was widely felt before. I mean, I think that if you were to talk to any business leader or corner office, they want to do that, but it wasn't a cultural muscle set that was there. Now it is there. And that cultural muscle set of caregiving and caring, being a caring company, as a Harvard Business School study came out for businesses in caregiving, is really there now. And I think that's kind of amazing. And I think when we think about what business can do, the first step is maybe just understanding it culturally. And then you can think about the benefits. Of course, folks like myself would love the policies and assistance where possible. But there's an earlier step of just appreciating the culture of caregiving in your team. Because as I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, with 53 million caregivers, there's every age group and background and geography that's part of that. And they're in your business. They just don't talk about it. And they don't talk about it just as you were mentioning, Mary. And I liken it, that it is similar to the dynamic of how difficult it was, and I'm not saying it's easy now, but how traditionally difficult it has been for women to go into work and then discuss that she and her partner or whoever's coming in, regardless of gender, saying we're going to have a baby now. And the trepidation that has existed traditionally for families and couples and partners is what caregivers go through similarly. Oh, I have a unwell parent living with a disability. Then what does that mean for promotion, investment in that individual? And that full dynamic, I think the cultural awareness may start with something that is still nascent, I think, when we talk about employee resource groups or business resource groups. But if we can explore one idea, and that is for a caregiving resource group, business resource group, that's the tip of that cultural muscle set being developed.
So today we're seeing people, I don't know if they're expecting or demanding some of this empathy from their employers, people refusing to go to work if I can't work from home, just changing jobs. We're seeing so much of that today. So is there a big shift going on that you think will be lasting here in terms of the relationship between companies and their employees?
You remember when we used to call certain businesses, Fred, social impact businesses? Sure. All businesses are now social impact businesses. And I remember when I was thinking about this 10 years ago because of some startups I was looking at, and several of them from my business partners were social impact businesses. And therefore the funding for social impact business was a certain vertical that you could go after. And it wasn't a big vertical, put it that way. And now we're at the time where social impact business, yeah, you might have some, but the lines have gotten fatter and more blurry, and that's, I think, great. In terms of a major change, you both have watched organizations come and go and mature and sometimes not mature. And in this case, I think we've got to wait, 2 to 3, 4 years. But the opening is here. The business cases that we learn in business school, coming from Harvard, coming from Michigan, go blue, and others, will start to reflect this caring company idea. And once those case studies come in, that's when our future leaders will start to think about how to inculcate and productize and put into the process to avoid the bottlenecks of being an uncaring company. And I think that's in front of us.
So let's talk about you as a journalist. You report around the world, and yet you took this very deep dive on the topic of caregiving, produced a film, produced a book. How has this changed you as a journalist?
They kind of, it's chicken and egg, Mary. It is both being a caregiver and then doing more stories like I described earlier that really question, are we caring about other people properly? And are we reinforcing the right values? it's either there as a journalist or not. We're not going to, fabricate anything. But, one of the things that I think that has changed over the years, and especially going through the documentary, it took 5 years to start and finish. We're still in the process of, it'll be, out on PBS in 2022. And we're also talking about international distribution. I'm a freshman when it comes to documentaries, movie making, but I realized the benefit and the importance of putting caregiving on the silver screen. And I knew that the cultural gap, and I know I'm going back to that again, that we have in our society needed to be bridged. And one of the biggest ways, as you know, is to get onto the silver screen. And books are another way. But, I wanted to swing for the fences. So I think the way it certainly changed me is, what am I doing with a documentary and a book? And so, yeah, it's taken so many hours, and it's been pro bono work. And I just, I would not have written it. I think my dad, who's a pastor, I say, is laughing all the way to the bank, because even though he is now in his 8th year of Alzheimer's, and he cannot walk, and he cannot talk, and he cannot eat, except through his feeding tube, he's laughing all the way to the bank because he got his son to write a book about selflessness and to do a movie about caregiving.
I said that to Fred this morning when I learned about your father being a minister. I said, the ministry continues. And I'm a fan of staying in a space for a long time. And it's almost like a puzzle, but it's also a sense of mastery, because you're pulling out the most important themes in the tapestry. And I think selflessness and gratitude and kindness, these are values that are so important in the daily journey of caregiving. So Fred, this has been very inspiring.
I wanted to ask Richard too, along the lines of what you were just saying, Mary, before we close. As an Asian American and a journalist, I suspect some of the email you get isn't always friendly. And any thoughts about how caregiving and selflessness can help to overcome some of these divisions that we're seeing and facing every day today?
Yeah, Fred, one of the thematics that have been consistent since I started in journalism, really 25 years ago when I was in college, one of the first stories I covered was Rodney King. And I was a cub reporter, and then I covered Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and then Freddie Gray in Baltimore, and George Floyd recently. And I'm standing in the streets reporting on all of these. And then there was what happened for the AAPI community, the Asian American Pacific Islander community, over the last 2 years, where in 1 year, I should say, we saw over 8,000 reported anti-Asian hate incidents. And then Atlanta in March of last year. And all of these things kind of come together. I think that we're just forgetting about the others, and that we shouldn't see them as others. And I think caregiving and selflessness, and caregiving specifically, is a journey and an experience, no matter where you are on your journey, that no matter where you are in your life, is that it does sort of bring you back to the basics. And that's why in Sky Blossom, the film, and in the book, I am intersectional in the characters and the stories I tell, from all communities of color and from all communities of what we believe to be part of our fabric here in the United States. And I think when we can show those differences is where we find the sameness. And in the examples that I bring up in African American, Latino American, Native American, Asian American, white American families in the book, as well as what we did in Sky Blossom, is not to say, oh, here is your Black family, your Asian family, and blah, 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 and finish with that. Instead, it's just to say, see, these are people, and they're all living their journey and trying to get it done the right way. Long answer to your question, but to say that caregiving is somewhat of an equalizer. It's somewhat of a way of bringing us back to, thinking of other people, because to care give, just thinking of those two, root words, is within itself the answer to the question.
Being a professor, I always think about, so what grade would you give yourself on this? in this case, I think you definitely get the A+, and you inspire all of us who become caregivers, who are caregivers, to give it your best, right? To have the patience, to take time for yourself, to get the energy and the reserve to make a difference in someone's life, no matter how vulnerable they are.
Yes, and with limits, which all three of us know. I write in one chapter about unmitigated selflessness.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about the scream where my mother did give too much.
Right.
And she's paying the price now with her own physical maladies and disabilities because she completely let her health go to the side to take care of my dad. And we have to be careful with that. That goes in line with the mental health discussion earlier. And but I would believe that my mother would say, and I would say, that it is not a zero-sum game, that really caregiving is a 1 + 1 = 3. And it may not feel like that every day, but at the end or throughout the time, you'll see it, those glimpses of the 1 + 1 = 3, and don't run away from it. It's true. You just don't know what'll happen. You might end up doing a documentary and a book.
Well, all we can say is watch the documentary Sky Blossom, streaming on Peacock and available on Amazon Prime. And the book again is Enough About Me, The Unexpected Power of Selflessness. Richard does the audiobook version as well.
Oh, and what a fascinating book to listen to. I really enjoyed it. And I can't think of a better topic this time of year than that of caregiving. So many people giving so much of themselves, over 44 million in the US alone. People like Richard, and the care and kindness and commitment he shows is just amazing. And the people and companies that are dedicated to making life better for caregivers and for those of us who need care.
And we'll be back with another edition soon of the podcast. And in the new year, we'll have an additional podcast series to talk about the companies that are innovating and making deals in longevity and aging. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
And Fred, I wish you a happy Hanukkah. Yesterday, as we were decorating the tree, I got the Dr. Fauci ornament, which says, "Keep calm and wash your hands." So we wish all of our listeners a wonderful holiday season, and stay safe and healthy.